Good afternoon, my little dumplings. I hope this finds you healthy and happy and using your hand sanitizer and washing your hands and not touching your face and whatever else they're telling us to do. Um, I'm really getting tired of sitting at home, but I understand the necessity of that. And there have been a lot of things have happened in the last few days that have brought this all into perspective. That if all I have to do is sit at home and do this, which I don't like to do things this way, um, that's a small price to pay for things that are going on. So, um, with that, I want to pick up kind of where we left off. Before that, I do want to say thank you for those of you who played along with the scavenger hunt. The whole point of that, I wanted to do that in class when we came back. Obviously, we couldn't do that, so I wanted to find a way to let you experience it. You don't have to use worksheets all the time to get ideas and concepts across to your students. That was the whole point. I think some of you enjoyed it, some of you were scratching your head, some of you were on the struggle bus with it. I get it. I was a little concerned because I wanted to go back and work a little bit more on phonics, but that way we could do a little bit and gives you a little bit of an idea the next time you're out and about, just walking around your neighborhood or out in the woods, walking around, keeping your social distance. Look for things and see if you can categorize them. Are they a long vowel sound? Are they a digraph? Are they a blend or cluster? Is there a schwa in the word? What's going on with these words? Just play with them and it will certainly help you. So as we're going on, we've talked about read alouds. um, this shared book experience is a little different than a read aloud in that it's usually a book that's already been read to the children. Not that the kids have read it, but the children that you have read the book to them. Remember, we talked about this before. I know you heard this, I'm sure, and from Dr. D in children's literature, that a lot of times, not all the time, but a lot of times, you want the read aloud experience to be just above the students' reading levels, so they are experiencing new vocabulary that they wouldn't be able to pronounce on their own, and they're hearing you read fluently. You're reading with expression, you're doing all the things that promote fluency, and they're hearing that from you. So you model the fluent reading, and because they're participating somehow, it also helps them to further develop their listening skills. If you remember, we talked about this before, that children's listening comprehension, there are multiple kinds of comprehension. Their listening comprehension is always above the reading comprehension until they become more proficient in their reading. So you have to try to work to enhance their listening comprehension, their listening skills. And as you do that, you're modeling fluent reading, and then you ask them questions about it. What did this sound like? Did this sound like I was surprised? Does it sound like a question? How you model those different kinds of things for the children. Oh boy, hello. Laptop's not waking up today. The shared book reading often involves reading from a big book. We've talked about big books so that everybody in the group can see the pictures and the words clearly. You can also use it projected up on the smartboard or Promethean board. Have a book, use YouTube. Use the books on YouTube. You don't always have to be the one reading the book to establish the fluency. Have the janitor read a book, one of the cooks, the principal, the secretary, a different teacher. Kids need, they can hear those different voices and how people inflect differently, and have parents do it. Parents are always, most of the time, or grandparents want to get involved and do something and come up with an activity or some way that they can help you out as the teacher. Let them do it. When the teacher uses a pointer, you can use a pointer. The teacher that I used to teach with, she taught first grade when I taught second grade. She used a pointer. I used my hand. So it's just different strokes for different folks. But the idea here is that you are emphasizing the concepts of print, concepts of books, that you're going left to right, that it's smooth. You're not doing the follow the bouncing ball like the old cartoons. It's not word by word by word. It's flowing. It's sentences that are flowing from one word to the other. And you emphasize that with the younger children, and the correspondence of spoken to written words. Again, we did that with the language experience activity so that the children could see words that came out of their mouth could be written down on paper. They're not born with that information. That has to be taught. So we need to do that. You also need to emphasize those little places within the print where you break a word. There's a space between words. That's how we know we go from one word to another. A period ends a statement. A question mark ends a question, that your voice goes up at the end of a question. What are exclamation marks for? Where do you stop? A comma shows a pause in a sentence. Those all have to be learned. We're not born with that information. This stuff does not come from Sinai. It comes from the teacher and the parents. And you have to pick up and teach those particular things. Even though they seem very inane, they're not, because the kids don't have that background. When you use small group and one-to-one story reading, it's a lot of times considered too impractical in the schools. One-on-one and small group reading yield tremendous benefits if they're done correctly. And they need to be incorporated into school programs. However, I understand sometimes there's just not enough time in the day. So what I did, I tried so many different ways of doing stuff with kids. What I finally came to, and which I found worked for me, you have to find what will work for you, is that when I taught second grade and first grade, I took two of my children every day, and I had their checklists, what they were doing. I had their portfolios of their papers, where they were struggling, where they were doing well. And two kids a day, while the other ones were working at centers, I had two every day who one at a time would come back to me at the small little kidney shaped reading table, would come to the back of the classroom with me, and I would do some checklisting with them. I would do a little bit of reading assessment with them, and I would do one-on-one reading, one-to-one reading with them at their level. Some of the stuff we read was a little higher, some of it was a little lower, but they all got an opportunity. And because I never had more than like 20, I usually got to every child at least every other week. So that was a good thing, and that worked really well. And then I could send reports home to the parents and kept them in the loop very easily that way. The most striking benefit of one-to-one story reading at home, often called the lap technique, is the interactive behavior it involves, along with the immediate access children have to information. When we talking about the lap technique, we're talking about having a child sit on your lap to read, like grandma or grandpa or mom or dad. One of the things with the lap technique that mimics that in a classroom is having the children sit around you while you are reading to them, either putting a big book on an easel or you're reading to them. One of the things that I would do, and this was always after lunch recess, was I read to my kids a lot, or they read to us a lot, but I would sit on the floor after lunch so they could kind of power down before we went on. And I would always read. That was my time to read from a chapter book. And they would just get on the floor with me. They knew that was the routine. Hands to themselves. Now they did not have to sit crisscross applesauce, hands in the bowl, but they did have to keep their hands to themselves. But I would have some of them lay with their head up against my leg. Once in a while, even at second grade, you're going to have a few of them after they've eaten and after they've gone out and run around. They come in and they power down, and some of them will fall asleep. But you just you it's just such it gets them close. It's a time of working with them. Now when we do this, when I did this in this method, I didn't necessarily use a book that we had to use for class. That was our time, that and I taught them that we're reading for enjoyment, for the pure enjoyment of reading. But this also, when you do this as a class for a specific lesson, it gives you insight not only into what they already know, what they want to know, which is what this settles on this slide, but it also gives you insight into their thinking. It gets you into their head when you follow up with, how do you know, what makes you say that, where in the reading did you hear that, or did you read that? We can follow up and we can get a better idea about what they're thinking, and we can get in their head and try to help them correct if we have some incorrect information going on. Compared with one-to-one readings, reading to small groups of children seems to encourage more and earlier responses. This is only going to happen if they're in a safe, risk-free environment. If your classroom, if you have established the no bully law, and we're not going to make fun of anybody, we're not going to poo-poo anyone's answer. All answers are accepted. We may do a little more research with one or two of them, whether it's to find out more or to see if they're actually right. That's the only way that this is going to work in your classroom. Children tend to repeat one another's remarks, and then they're motivated to respond to and elaborate on what their peers have said, but it's not always on the mark. You're going to have a lot of, especially first graders, second graders, you'll be talking about something and somebody will say, well, my grandma did that and blah, blah, blah. Well, then somebody else is going to go off on a tangent about their grandma or their dog or their cat or their goldfish or their hamster or their brother. You have to pull them back because at that point, or give them a minute or two to talk about that and then pull them back in the group. Turn to your neighbor. Okay, I'm hearing a lot of new stories. I want you to turn to your neighbor and I'm going to give you 2 minutes and tell your partner the story that you just are dying to tell each other, and then we'll come back and we'll tell a couple of them and then we'll move on. And a lot of times that will work. They will get the story out. They just want somebody to listen to it, whether it's the teacher or their friends or whomever. They just need somebody to listen to them. With collaborative reading, the National Reading Panel suggested that collaboration is an important strategy for developing comprehension. The strategies are often referred to as response groups because they enable children to engage in productive and personal conversations about the text. We have to get the kids in the text. We have to get them to make connections to that text. Those connections to that text are so very important. Even if they don't have a direct connection to it, we need to find some way to get them connected to that text, whether through pictures or their friends, their neighbors, their parents, their grandparents. We need to get them to make connections in order to build background knowledge from which they can draw in the future. Response groups allow students to exchange ideas, to listen to each other, refine ideas, and think critically about issues. Now, this is only going to work once again if they feel free and uninhibited to respond and to open their mouth and give an opinion, an idea, whatever. That's the only way this is going to work. You're going to have to really tease some of this out of some of your kids because they're not going to want to say anything. If you have children who are reluctant to talk in front of other groups, let them write it out. Don't force them to speak. It's a response. The response can be verbal. It could also be written. If they can listen to it, they can also write it. So the old saying is, if I can think it, I can write it. If I can write it, I can read it. That's where you want these kids with this collaborative reading idea here. These are all reading strategies that you can use in your own classroom. And we're going to stop right there and we will pick up with literature circles on the next video. Stay safe, wash your hands, use your hand sanitizer, and don't hoard the toilet paper. I'll talk to you in a little bit.